Now, the foreign-born population, over 3 million currently, as of 2006. More than double what it was back in 1970. As you can see here, the city is 37% foreign-born. Another fact, the city's percent foreign-born will never rise all that much. The record in the 20th century was 1910, 1920. About 40% of our population was foreign-born. 40. Okay? It never rises much above that. You know why now? Because of the chart I showed you before. If 53% of the births are the foreign-born mothers and those kids are native-born, you see why. There is almost a cap on the percent foreign-born. So you will hear frequently people talk about 40 or 45%. No, it's about 37% currently. Our major countries, look at 1970 and look at 2006. You see how the city has changed, how it's changed by and large in a non-violent way. The tumultuous change that occurs in New York City, a theme that I want to leave with you also this evening, is that in many parts of the world, if you put together this combination of countries, you will see a great degree of conflict. You do not see that in New York. My argument has always been that people are too busy making a living, earning a living. People are too busy conducting the business that they came here to develop, being entrepreneurs, trying to increase the quality of life for them and for their children. If you look at the left, you see the European city that was New York in 1970, 63% non-Hispanic white, essentially European. And now you see the New York City that is Asian, that is Caribbean, that is Hispanic, South American, the whole mix of countries that we have here. Now, in terms of the topic about government becoming empowered, so to speak, becoming part of the government, what I want you to think about is New York versus some other places. Take a look at this combination. So now let's look at Los Angeles. 1.5 million foreign-born in 2006, about half the number that are in New York. We got the top 8 countries in New York City, and we barely have half of the total. Think about all the constituencies, how different they are. Look at Los Angeles. Between the Mexicans and the Salvadorans, you have the majority of the foreign-born population in Los Angeles. Let's look at Chicago, the 3rd largest city. About 600,000 immigrants. Mexico is 48% of the total. Add Poland to it, and you're well over half. Again, New York City, 8 sources, and you're not even at half. Houston, the next largest city, 52% Mexican. When you talk about, as we will discuss later on, the political overlay on the population, think about the different constituencies, the ethnic constituencies that develop here in New York because of our diversity, that frankly may not develop in other places. Or in other places, you may deal with 1 or 2 big populations, but by and large, you don't have the massive numbers by country that you have here. Now, how does this all play out? Now look, this is extremely ambitious. We just started using this chart. I'm going to go over it quickly because it's a challenge. This chart is a result of the fact that several people at City Hall and other places have said to me, Salvo, I want a snapshot of the city on one slide. Who we are, ethnic, ancestry, and race, all together. Start with the Asian population. It has been for many decades between 40 and 50% Chinese. You see the Asian Indian, the Korean, the Filipino, the blend here. You see Pakistan show up. There's a country not here, which is now number 5 on our list, Bangladesh. The future of New York, as far as Asia is concerned, not only involves India and China, but increasingly involves Pakistan, increasingly involves the Bangladeshi populations. Hispanic, once dominated totally by Puerto Rican population. Now less so. You see Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, you see the blend. Although I should tell you, given where you are, that Queens and Staten Island have actually increased in their share of Puerto Ricans in New York. Why? Suburbanization within the city. People may choose to come to Staten Island for the same reason they go to Queens. Home ownership, It is the middle-class borough, okay? So, you've got a blend of Hispanic subgroups. So the black population, and we're struggling with this, Caribbean, 36%. South removed, for want of a better term, these are African Americans with their heritage linked to the Great Migration that started in 1910 and worked its way through up until 1970 from the southern states. And then the white population we could spend another 20 minutes on. It's a blend of older immigrant groups such as the Italian and Irish populations, the New Russians, a blend of Eastern European groups that have all, many of these groups have kind of held their own. In some cases, the diehard factor is set in among Italians. They're Italians, present company included, who will probably never leave the Bronx, okay? When you get down to a certain point, so you never go to zero. You go near zero, but then the diehard factor kicks in, and then, you know, people aren't leaving after a certain percentage. So this is what we're dealing with when you talk later about who is gaining politically, who is doing what, all the coalitions that need to be built, ethnic, racial, ancestry. My God, it is dizzying in the city to try to figure this out. Now, I want to couple this with something else. Let me see if I pick my age. If you look at a whole bunch of neighborhoods in New York City and you look at these groups, you will notice many of them are very young. There are a lot of young people in some groups. Other groups are dominated by older people. If you ever ask, how could, in some neighborhoods in New York, which have seemingly shifted their ethnic composition, how come another European gets elected? The answer is having to do with the older population, which votes like crazy, and which, when you look at the population by age, still dominates the population, for example, 65 and over in some communities. If I were to do this for council districts, for state senate, state assembly districts, we could demonstrate that a big chunk of the voter population is actually European, even though the population has turned over, because the other populations, the newer immigrants, are very, very young, especially, for example, the Mexican population, also non-citizen, the Mexican population, the Dominican population. But look, the news is, look at the population under 18. This is the future of New York. Substantial contingents of every group, with no group dominating the demographic landscape. You will be looking very soon at a New York that has a level of diversity that is probably as substantial as it was 100 years ago, perhaps unprecedented because it crosses racial lines. Big issue for anybody who's thinking about reaching out. Any of you get involved in social services. If you take the 7.6 million New Yorkers ages 5 and over, you look at this chart, you see that close to half speak a language other than English at home. If you take that slice, and then you look at the people who have problems with English, it amounts to about a quarter of our population. 1.8 million New Yorkers have problems with English. So why don't they learn English? You should know now, from what I showed you earlier, this constant churning of population produces a situation where new people are in front of you every minute. It means, when I speak to city agencies, that the job of the people who do language translation, the jobs of the people who deliver social services, all kinds of health services, they come to me and they say, why am I so tired? I educate these people every year, and new people are always showing up. My job never ends. Well, that is the key to New York, the major challenge. When you are a city like ours, dynamic, and you have an influx of people on a constant basis, people moving out and people coming in, you face a continuous challenge of providing services for people who are always new. It means your job never ends. So I get to break this news, for example, to people who provide health education, that essentially it's not like you keep providing a service and then eventually it's not needed anymore. The dynamism of the city requires continuous attention. Again, if you're concerned about this dynamic, go and look at places with the absence of such a dynamic. It's like I mentioned before, I don't want to pick on Buffalo. I'll pick on Philadelphia.